Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this video we're going to look at a open wheel race car, a Royale RP30. We're going to dissect it and find out how good or how bad it is. You might recall that I had actually an old-timer called a TS100 built by Stedman, a replica of the Jaguar SS100, but a very nice replica with only about 28 of them ever built. And I had this car registered on the road, but I decided to get rid of it and I offered it for trade or a swap. So one day somebody calls me and goes like, well, I have an RP30 that I'm willing to swap with your Stedman TS100. So we met, we looked at each other's car, we agreed. So we kind of traded the cars back and forth. So I gave him mine and I got his. And here is the Super Formula Ford Royale P30 built by Royale, which was a British sports cars builder from 1967 to 1986. So about 20 years. Of course, meanwhile they have stopped, but the cars were quite a legend on the racetrack. They made different models, and the RP stands for Royale and the P for prototype, and they always had given it a sequential number. So the first car they made was an RP1. This is a RP30, so it's the 30th model they have made. Out of the RP30, 18 have been built. This one has serial number 2, and it was sold to Richard Dutton as the first owner who raced with this car in the UK. So you probably noticed that the front of the car is having a pretty big nose. Typically with Super Formula Fords, the nose wouldn't be that big and you would have some wings on the left and on the right. But on this car that is not the case. So when they developed the car, they found out that the car was having quite a bit of understeer at higher speeds because of the turbulence of the air and because the car was light in the front. So they had to do something about it. So they created this kind of a nose-wing combination, which is now providing sufficient downforce to keep that front on the road so it doesn't start to float or becomes loose. And that's why you see this big nose, very distinct for this car. The Super Formula Ford, or the FF2000, is quite different than the Formula Ford 1.6. On the RP30 we've got that front wing actually, but it's embedded in the nose. And they often come with a rear wing, which is adjustable to increase the down pressure on the rear suspension. And typically you would find slicks on a Formula Ford 2000, and the rims are light metal rims. And those rims are typically held in place with a central locking bolt, not with the 4-bolt you would typically find on a Formula Ford 1600. This one is a Formula Ford 1600, and as you can see there are no wings in the front, there are no wings in the back because that is not allowed, and the tires they run with are not slicks. Now as you can see we are running steel rims on the Formula Ford 1600, and they are held in place with 4 bolts. The motor is a 1.6 motor. Now the RP30 is developing about 143 horsepower because I've seen the results on the dyno on it from the previous owner. So you might think that is not a lot of horsepower, but to be very honest, it is a lot for that car, and it really goes fast because the weight of the car and the horsepower together will determine how fast it is. And to be very honest, the RP30 with its weight and its horsepower is faster than a Porsche GT3. Let's put the RP30 on the scales and see what the total weight is, and see what the cross weight balance is and what the ratio is in the front and in the back, because I'm a bit curious to see what that will be, because that's very important for road handling. And then we'll have a look as well on how they distributed the weight to get the point of gravity as low as possible, but also the central point of gravity in front of the engine, because that is all so important when you race on the track. Weight is everything. Horsepower is one thing, but weight is even more important. So let's put it on the scales and see. The RP is now on the platforms, and you might remember these platforms that I built some time ago because my floor is not 100% level. You have to have a level floor to weight your car. I placed the scales up, so now I'm just going to roll it up and then we check the weight. Right now the scales are calibrated, as you can see. So now let me roll up the car and see what we get. The total weight of the car is 460 kilograms. So left to right ratio, so the left side of the car carries 50.2% of the weight and the right side of the car carries 49.8%. Now that is really good. So there's a little bit of a difference, but again, this is minimal. So now let's check the cross balance. So we've got 72.2% from the left front to the right rear. So that's that diagonal that carries 47.2%. And remember, when you corner, forces are transferred diagonal in the car. So let's see what the other one is. And of course, then the right rear to the front left is carrying 52.8%. So what we've seen here on the scales is the car has a total weight of 460 kilograms. And I am 64 kilograms myself, so if I add myself to it, we're ending up with 520 kilograms actually in the car, fully fueled up. That is not bad, and considering the horsepower on the engine and the weight, I think we have a really, really good power-weight ratio, which beats actually a Porsche GT3. Nevertheless, we also checked that the weight distribution from the left side to the right-hand side of the car is about 50%. It was 0.2% off, which is okay. That's very small. So I'm happy about that. The front to the back, we also had quite a big difference. The back tends to carry 60-odd% of the load, which is quite normal because that's where the engine and the gearbox is. The front was very light. So that is good. And then we checked the cross balance on the car. So from the front left to the rear right, and then from the right front to the left rear. I always screw that up. And that's like a diagonal, and forces when you corner are traversing along these diagonals. So it is important that the car is cornering in exactly the same way, left or right. And that's why you want to have the sum of the front wheel and the rear wheel. That added together should be the same value as the right front wheel with the left rear wheel. Add those two up and that should be the same weight. So if those two sums are the same, then you have a really good cross balance. This car, it doesn't have it. We're sitting at around 52% on one side. That's not all that good. But that can be adjusted because that's where we're going to adjust the springs, the strength on the springs. I have a complete video on all this if you want to see that. I'm not going to do all this right now because that would make this video way too long and it would be just a repetition. But I just wanted to give you that little bit of information. So enough of the weight and the scales. I'm going to take it all off and then we start looking a little bit deeper into this car, what we have here. So if you're going to buy a race car, you should not just look on the external looks. You should actually take the polyester shell off and then look what's underneath. Look at all the mechanical components. Because at the end of the day, if you're going down that track at 100 clicks or 200 clicks an hour, whatever it is, you're playing with your life and you want to make sure that that car is really in a good condition. Now these cars have been around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, so it is not abnormal that they have some wear and tear and fatigue, and that's the kind of stuff you should pick up and repair before you take it to the track. Now I know this car was actually restored in 2019. It had a complete space frame rework, it had new powder coating and all that, and in 2021 it was reworked again on the engine and the gearbox. So quite some work was done on this car already, and we'll probably see that if it's true or not. Of course, I already have checked it before when we did the trade. So let's start by removing the nose. I do like body panels that are easy removable because I hate to undo a lot of bolts, and on this car it's easy. We just have a couple of studs here and then the nose really comes off. What we got Under the nose is actually an aluminum radiator, and it's a fairly large one. It's a good thing that it's in the front because you're getting a lot of airflow coming through it, but also it puts a little bit more weight into the front. So that by itself is not a bad thing. It looks in pretty good condition, and of course it's aluminum, so if it's aluminum it is lighter because weight is so important. In addition, we've got silicon-based hoses for the cooling, which is real good. The clamps are not corroded, so the radiator and the hoses, they seem to be in a very good condition. So behind the radiator we've got our racing battery, and I already have removed or loosened up the bracket. Now this is a 30 amps hour battery, which means you can run 30 amps out of this battery during 1 hour. That is more than enough for this race car because you don't use a lot of power, and I explain this in a few minutes. But if you buy a race car, you probably will have to change the battery on that, and you may want to size it to your specific needs. So like I said, you know, you should actually change a battery out with a new one if you buy a race car, but let's have a look at this battery anyway, if what state it's in. And I already have tried to charge it up, and that didn't work too well. So I'm going to hook up my battery tester, and then you can see what the state is. So let's go and test the battery and see what we got. Battery test, regular flood. It's a CCA, cold start capacity, amperage, 450. That's the size of the battery. And now we do some testing and see. And like I said, I actually have it charged up already, and you can see we've got 90% of the charge, but the healthy is 0%. So this battery is really no good, so it needs to be replaced. And that is measured based on the internal impedance. This is what happens when you let lead-based batteries sit there too long without charging them. In the back we've got our master brake cylinders for the rear and the front and the clutch. Regardless of the state of the car, you will have to change the brake fluid anyway, and you have to change it at regular times because it does absorb humidity. So I'm going to change it no matter what it is, and I don't have no idea what's inside, but I'm going to flush it, and I'm going to use my Ferrado Racing braking fluid because this one is having a higher boiling point than the standard braking fluids. If you buy a race car, pay a special attention to the brake hoses, and they should be braided. As you can see here, they should be clean, not pinched, not damaged. And if you look on this car, you can see that the previous mechanic actually has placed some rubber protection on the corners. This is the kind of stuff you want to see because now you know that this person actually took very well care of it. And of course, they should not be leaking at any of the connection points. So I'm going to take off all the panels, and I do like these quick release solutions. And the locking pins are inside here. And I got those unlocked. Now basically this should be able to come off. But let's see if that works or not. There we go. See, this is so nice because this is one big piece and easy to remove. So there's some quick release connections here in the back. And I think there is another one over here inside. And that should be it for this panel. So this is one of those quick releases. You just pull them back and then the panel is in essence loose. Very handy. Notice that the panels overall are in very good condition except this one. It has a crack in here, so this will have to be repaired for sure. But these are all small things to fix, and it's not all that hard. This is just light polyester and it can be fixed in no time. So now that we have a bit of a better view, let's come back to the battery and the power that this car would require. So let me take off the steering wheel. And what you can see here is the dashboard, and we just got a couple of dials, right? We got an RPM and meter. This looks like a brand new one, and the dash has been kind of rebuilt, which is nice. We've got a pressure meter for the oil pressure, and we got a water temperature or engine temperature meter. We got the start button, and then we got a rain light switch. And that's basically all we have on this car, and there's an on and off switch as well on the side. We can see that we have actually a oil pressure gauge, which is an analog gauge, because this tube right here is going to an oil channel on the engine. So that is not electrical. Got one small fuse here, by the way. We've got our tacho, and of course that one is an electrical one. And the older cars, that was mechanical. So this is a consumer of power of the battery. And then we have our temperature meter, which again is an analog ether-based temperature gauge. So no power needed for that. So the only power we need is on the dashboard is actually for the tacho and a oil warning light that I'm going to show you. So here is that oil pressure warning light, and you can see if I flip the switch that the oil pressure indicator comes on immediately. And here we have the rain light, and that is also a consumer, but of course only when it rains. And the other big consumer, which we should not forget, which is the most important one, is the electronic ignition. So let's have a look. So here we got our distributor, we've got our rotor, which we can take off. And here we've got a Hall effect sensor. This is going to pick up the pulses from this rotating piece here, and that means we have an electronic ignition. The control module, the amplifier will be a little bit further down. Now this is going to draw power for sure, so we'll have to check out how much power that draws, and then we can calculate how big our battery should be. The weight of a race car is very important in racing, because the less weight, the faster you will be. And that is why you don't want to oversize your battery. Now keep in mind that these race cars, like the RP30, but in fact all Formula Fords, they have no alternator to charge the battery. So you rely purely on the capacity of the battery for the duration of the race. Now it all depends on how long you race, but the point is, if you make the battery too big, it's going to be heavy, and we're talking about a few kilograms. If you make the battery too small, then it may not have enough capacity to keep you going. So you need to find a balance. Now I'm running a small battery on mine always, and you've seen that before in my previous videos. And I change the battery out after about an hour, because then it's kind of half depleted. I don't want to go all the way to the end. Now, the other thing you don't want to do is to start your car on that internal battery. You want to start it with an 8 battery, and I have an external battery here, so if you're in the pit, you hook up this big connector here, right? And you plug it into your car on a power port, which you should have easily accessible, and on this car it is, and that's another good thing. Look for that, and if it doesn't have that, well, then you might want to change things a bit. It's not a big deal, but then that's how you're going to start the car. Right? Not the other way around. You don't start it on the internal battery, but you still want to make sure that the internal battery is, how should I say, powerful enough to do an emergency start once you're on the track, because you could stall the car. So starting 2 times on the track, and then the normal consumption, and then for half an hour or an hour. This is how I always calculate my batteries. And I'm going to try to start it up with this 8 battery, and then we'll see. I don't know if it's going to start or not, but I would think it does. Main breaker, you should always have that one. It's a requirement. Turn on the battery, making sure it's not in gear, because otherwise you might fly forward. There's no choke on these cars, and I'm not sitting inside, so I might have to lean over a bit and throttle the carb a few times. See, it doesn't start. So that starts quite nice, and it runs quite smooth. So as you can see, the engine is revving at around 800 RPMs on idle, which is fairly low for a race car, to be honest. And we got about 40 PSI on the oil pressure, which is okay. The water temperature is kind of coming up, but we are not running. And actually the oil pressure light is off, which is good. Now, as you can hear, the engine is running very smooth and regular, so this car is certainly well maintained. It also means that the engine is in a pretty good condition. So I'm quite happy with that. Of course, I checked all this before when we did the swap. You also notice that we have a very nice stainless steel exhaust, and this is custom built so that all these pipes are having the same length before they get into the collector. And here we have that collector, and you can see this is custom built, right? You should also check that there are no leaks on the engine anywhere, and verify that all the belts are in a good condition. So the belt that you see turning right here, this is the belt that drives the camshaft, which is underneath the valve cover. And over here we have our 3-stage oil pump, which is an external oil pump, which collects the oil from the dry sump, which we call the scavenger pump, the first entry. It sucks the oil that drips back out of the engine into the oil sump, but this oil sump is very undeep. It's a dry sump, as we call it. We don't store oil in it. And then it's going to push it back out and recover it into the oil reservoir on the other side. This big container here, that's where the oil is in, and the oil is being recovered from the dry sump. It's been pushed into this reservoir, and then it will suck it back out from the oil reservoir, back into the pump, and then back into the engine to feed the engine with oil. This is how that pump works. I think this is a Titan pump. Very good quality pump, and you can also see that whoever did this made really good clamps on this. This is how it's supposed to be, and that he also threaded all the bolts. So that is really good. I do like it the way this engine has been built. You can see it's been built in a proper way and not in a hurry-scurry way. So if you need to fill up the car with oil, this is where you fill it. So it's quite different than what you would see on a normal car. And there's a couple of reasons why we're using dry sumps. A dry sump means there's no oil in the sump underneath the engine. In other words, if you're going to corner fast with your race car, the oil in the sump, if you had a normal sump, would move from the left to the right or the front to the back, depending on how you drive. And it could be that the oil pump, which is actually sitting inside the normal sump, would start to suck air, and that of course is not good, because then you're going to have a issue with oiling the engine. That is why race cars don't have a wet oil pan. They have a dry sump, as we call it, so no oil is underneath the engine. It all gets sucked back into this reservoir. It's external, and the oil pump is also external, so no matter how we turn or curve or which way the oil is moving, it is always available, and the pump never runs dry, let's say. So that is why we have this. There's another advantage of a dry sump, is that the crankshaft isn't hitting the oil and the splatter that's going on there, so you save a little bit of horsepower as well. Also check for oil leaks, although oil leaks are not really a big issue, because most of them you can fix it if it's just like on the valve cover. But see, this is a Kirk seal, which is brand new, so I like to see that. I hate to see silicone. And look for leaks where the cylinder head is matching the block itself. This is dry on this car, but also have a close look where the gearbox is actually attached to the engine. Quite often these edges here break off due to fatigue. This engine is really good. I haven't measured the compression yet, but I can just hear it. It's going to be good. I will check the compression on all the cylinders later on when we prepare the car. But yeah, this looks real good. So this is a standard carburetor that you would find on all the Formula Fords. This is a DGAF 3236, I think. Yeah, that's what it is. Nothing really special. It's probably jetted in a certain way. What I do like is that all the bolts are properly inserted, that it looks clean. And we got a filter which is easily removable. Now I have to say, I'm not too keen on this type of filters because if you have backfire and some gas or a mixture of gas and air into it, it can caught fire. I rather like the metal meshed ones, but okay, it is what it is, and I guess I can live with that. You can actually tell how well it's been maintained and if it's been maintained by a professional or not, or somebody that takes things seriously. And you can see this often on how bolts are wired, right? This is like a safety wire. They drill a little hole and put a wire through it. And this is all over the car. So if you see that, then you know whoever worked on this car took safety very, very serious.